All eyes were on Anchorage, Alaska, as Air Force One cut through the cold northern sky. On board was a president who had built his entire political brand around the idea that he could make the ultimate deal. Waiting for him on the other side was a Russian leader whose strategy has always been less about compromise and more about endurance. The mission, at least on paper, was simple: negotiate an end to a brutal 3-year war in Ukraine. But after less than 2 hours behind closed doors, it was over. No breakthrough, no ceasefire, just two leaders stepping up to microphones, delivering vague statements and flying back home. So, what really went down? Thanks to public remarks, insider reporting, and careful analysis, we can now piece together the tense discussions, the irreconcilable demands, and the one fundamental disagreement that made peace impossible. Welcome to Nexus-Feed Deep Dive. This is the story of how the high-stakes Alaska summit unraveled before it even began. The August 15th summit was meant to be a turning point. For 3 years, the war in Ukraine has redrawn Europe's security map, reshaped NATO, and pushed Russia deeper into China's embrace. This meeting was the first time Trump and Putin had looked each other in the eye since 2019, and their first real summit since the infamous Helsinki meeting in 2018. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Trump publicly tried to soften expectations. He told reporters his goal wasn't necessarily a treaty, but to set the table for future talks. He declared he wanted a ceasefire as soon as possible, framing himself as the one leader bold enough to stop the killing. At the same time, he reassured Kyiv and its allies that he wouldn't negotiate over Ukraine's head, that the country's sovereignty was non-negotiable. The optics were carefully choreographed. The venue, Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson in Anchorage, was chosen as neutral ground, roughly halfway between Washington and Moscow. The backdrop for the cameras carried the hopeful words, "Pursuing peace." But the absence of one person said more than any slogan: Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. As the summit unfolded, Zelensky released a statement reminding the world that, on the very day of the talks, Russian missiles were still striking Ukrainian cities. His message was blunt. Talking peace while bombs are falling speaks volumes. To understand why things collapsed, you need to see each leader's strategy. For Trump, this was the ultimate test of his brand as a dealmaker. He has long claimed that only he could sit across from Putin and hammer out peace. His approach has always been built on personal diplomacy, the belief that deals are made not in committees but in the chemistry between powerful men. But Trump was walking a tightrope. On one side, he needed to look tough, ready to walk away, the way he is often described in The Art of the Deal. On the other, he needed to reassure jittery allies in NATO and a devastated Ukraine that he wouldn't trade away their future for a flashy handshake moment. His immediate goal wasn't peace, but momentum. The plan was simple: get Putin to agree to a follow-up meeting that would include Zelensky. For Trump, that was the win, creating the conditions for a trilateral summit. After the Alaska meeting, he promised to call Zelensky and NATO leaders, portraying himself as the facilitator rather than the judge. In his post-summit interview, Trump was clear. Now it's really up to President Zelensky to get it done. In his mind, he had opened the door, but whether anyone else wanted to walk through it, that was another matter. Putin, meanwhile, wasn't there to open doors. He was there to bolt them shut. For the Kremlin, the summit itself was already a victory, an acknowledgement that Russia remained indispensable to global security. Just being on U.S. soil, sitting across from the American president without Ukraine in the room, reinforced Putin's narrative that the war was not a conflict with Kiev, but a showdown with the West. His rhetoric was vintage Putin, polished, flattering, but uncompromising. He praised Trump's energetic efforts, then immediately laid out his non-negotiables. The war, he insisted, could only end if its root causes were addressed. That's Kremlin code for 3 things. 1. Ukraine must remain neutral and never join NATO. 2. The West must accept Russia's sphere of influence in Eastern Europe. 3. The post-Cold War security order itself must be rewritten. In short, Putin wasn't talking about ceasefires or humanitarian corridors. He was demanding a fundamental reordering of Europe. Ukraine, in his framing, was not a country with agency, but a pawn on a chessboard, one he believed he had the right to control. So where exactly did things fall apart? It seems Trump's entire strategy hinged on getting Putin to agree to a follow-up meeting that would include Zelensky. To Trump, this was the natural next step, proof that his personal diplomacy could move mountains. But for Putin, that was a bright red line. From the Kremlin's perspective, sitting down with Zelensky would elevate Ukraine's president to the status of an equal, and that's something Putin has spent years trying to deny. In his worldview, Ukraine isn't a sovereign adversary. It's a wayward province, a battlefield in a larger clash with the West. That's why the summit wrapped up so quickly. It wasn't about borders or ceasefire line. It was about legitimacy. Trump wanted Zelensky at the table. Putin wanted him out of the picture entirely. And on that point, there was no middle ground. The press conference that followed was a theater of emptiness. Putin spoke at length, praising the business-like atmosphere but offered no concessions. Trump, unusually subdued, called the talks extremely productive but quickly hedged. There's no deal until there's a deal. He repeated that line in different forms. We didn't get there, Bob, but we have a very good chance of getting there. A clear signal that the summit had failed its main objective. Neither man took questions. Both walked off stage. The Pursuing Peace banner behind them felt almost mocking, a hollow slogan hanging over a conversation that had gone nowhere. In the end, the Alaska summit revealed a brutal truth. You can't negotiate peace if one side refuses to recognize the other as legitimate. Trump arrived hoping to spark a process. Putin came to deliver a message. And in that clash, it was Putin who got what he wanted. A global stage, validation of his power, and not a single compromise in return. The war in Ukraine grinds on. Trump has shifted the burden to Zelensky, but Kiev has no partner in Moscow willing to talk on equal terms. For now, the guns keep firing, the missiles keep falling, and the path to peace looks as distant as ever. This summit was a critical moment, but the story is far from over. The strategic thinking in Washington, Moscow, and Kiev is constantly shifting. To make sure you don't miss our ongoing analysis of these complex geopolitical events, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you know when next we upload a video. And let us know in the comments section, what do you think happens next? Is a peace deal even possible without Putin and Zelensky talking directly? That's it on this edition of Nexus-Feed Deep Dive. Until our next one, stay curious, stay critical, and keep safe.